If you ask the old locals in the high country of New South Wales about Samir, they won't tell you about his money. They won't tell you about his degrees or the 5 years he spent in the subterranean dark of the Western Australian mines. They will tell you about the silence that walked into town before he did. Samir arrived in Sydney 20 years ago with a single vinyl suitcase, $84 Australian, and a laminated piece of paper containing a university acceptance letter he couldn't yet afford to pay for. He was 21 years old. In his home village, a place buried deep in the misty emerald terraces of the Himalayas, soil was sacred. It smelled of ancient rain and damp cedar. But when Samir stepped off the plane, Australia smelled of eucalyptus, hot asphalt, and an overwhelming vast sky that seemed to swallow a man whole. For the first 3 years, Samir didn't live. He survived. He slept 4 hours a night on a foam mattress shared with 2 other international students in a damp basement in Parramatta. By day, he wiped tables and drove delivery vans. By night, he studied civil engineering, his eyes stinging under cheap fluorescent light. When his savings ran dry, he took a job no one else wanted, a 6-month contract in Kalgoorlie, deep in the red heart of the desert. Down in the mines, 800 meters below the surface, the air was hot enough to bake bread. The red dust got beneath his fingernails, into his teeth, into his lungs. He swung hammers, operated heavy machinery, and watched men twice his age break down under the sheer monotony of the dark. But Samir had a secret weapon: memory. Whenever the claustrophobia threatened to crush his chest, he would close his eyes and smell the damp, sweet, terraced clay of his childhood village. He promised himself he would build a life so solid, so unshakable, that he would never have to descend into the dark again. He saved every cent. He finished his degree. He moved from mining to infrastructure, from civil contracts to project management. He learned to speak the language of blueprints, soil density, and corporate finance. Within a decade, Samir had conquered the wilderness. By 34, Samir was the picture of the Australian dream. He had married Maya, a brilliant, warm-hearted architect he met in Melbourne. They bought a modern 4-bedroom home in the leafy suburbs with a manicured lawn and a shimmering blue pool. Soon, the quiet halls were filled with the laughter of 2 children, a daughter with her mother's fierce eyes, and a son who carried Samir's quiet habit of observing everything. To anyone watching from the street, Samir had made it. He was a success story, a migrant who rose from dust to comfort. Except Samir couldn't sleep. Every night, while his family slept peacefully, Samir would walk out to his back garden. He would look at the manicured green lawn, chemically treated, perfectly flat, obedient. He would kneel down, press his fingers into the turf, and lift a handful of dirt to his nose. It smelled like nothing. No rain, no life, just inert, sterile dirt. He realized, with a quiet terror, that in building a fortress against poverty, he had built a cage. He had spent 15 years laying concrete over his past. The higher his salary grew, the hollower he felt inside. He was a man who knew the stress load of steel and the price of cubic meters, but he had forgotten the feel of living earth between his thumbs. Then came the rainy afternoon in October. It was meant to be a simple family road trip, a long weekend driving through the Southern Highlands, escaping the city traffic. But a fallen tree forced Samir to take a detour down a narrow, unmarked council road that sloped steeply down into a forgotten valley. The fog was thick, so thick the trees looked like gray ghosts against the windshield. Maya was asleep in the passenger seat. The kids were asleep in the back. Samir drove slowly, his headlights cutting through the mist. And then, as the road rounded a sharp bend, the fog parted. Samir hit the brakes so hard the tires whined on the wet bitumen. His breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. There, tucked into a horseshoe curve of the valley, lay a 40-acre property. It was completely abandoned. An old, weather-beaten timber cottage sat on a high ridge. But it wasn't the house that stopped Samir's heart. It was the land. The property was naturally carved into steep, natural steps that mimicked ancient agricultural terraces. A wild mountain creek rushed along the eastern border, spilling into small, natural stone basins. The trees growing along the fence line weren't native eucalyptus. They were old, overgrown walnut, plum, and wild cedar trees planted by some long-forgotten settler 60 years ago. It was impossible. It was a statistical anomaly. This valley in rural Australia was a near-perfect mirror image of the mountain ridge where Samir had been born, 8,000 miles away. Without waking his family, Samir stepped out of the car into the drizzling rain. He walked to the rusted iron gate, unlatched it, and walked onto the soil. He dropped to his knees in the mud. He lifted a handful of earth to his face and inhaled. It didn't smell of desert red dust. It didn't smell of suburban chemicals. It smelled of wet cedar, ancient rain, and home. That afternoon, Samir knew he was going to buy it. What he didn't know was that this land was about to demand something from him that money could never pay for. Within 3 months, despite his friends calling him crazy, despite Maya's quiet worry about moving the children away from the city, Samir sold the suburban house. He resigned from his corporate job. He poured every dollar of his savings into purchasing the Forgotten Valley estate. He was going to become a farmer. He didn't want to run a commercial enterprise. He wanted to tame the land. And Samir brought a lethal combination to agriculture: the ancient instincts of his ancestors and the relentless precision of a civil engineer. He mapped the water flow down to the millimeter. He rehabilitated the soil using organic compost, biochar, and traditional crop rotation. While other local farmers struggled with dry spells, Samir's terrace system captured every drop of mountain dew. Within 2 years, Samir's farm became a local legend. His orchards produced apples so crisp they sounded like a wooden snap when bitten. His heirloom tomatoes were so sweet that high-end Sydney restaurants signed contracts to buy his harvest months in advance. He planted saffron, rare mountain herbs, and traditional grains that no one believed could grow in Australian soil. He became the most celebrated farmer in the region. Agriculture magazines wrote profile pieces on him. Neighbors visited just to walk through his immaculate terraced fields. He had wealth, local fame, a thriving family, and land that rivaled the beauty of his birthplace. He had achieved the impossible. And yet, he was miserable. Why? Because the land was responding to him, but it wasn't speaking to him. To Samir, the farm had become just another engineering project. It was a factory that manufactured produce instead of buildings. He spent his days checking moisture meters, negotiating market prices, managing staff, and staring at profit and loss spreadsheets on his laptop. He was growing tons of food, but he felt as empty as he had when he was 800 meters underground in the Kalgoorlie gold mines. He realized the cruelest truth of his life. You can duplicate the shape of your homeland, but you cannot buy its soul. One crisp April evening, after sending a shipping container of produce to the city, Samir sat on his veranda. He looked down at his perfectly ordered, wildly profitable terraced farm. He felt a deep, sickening wave of disgust. He stood up, walked down into his office, and closed the ledger books. He decided to do something that would shock his family, ruin his business, and make the entire town think he had completely lost his mind. The next morning, the local distributors arrived at Samir's farm with 3 refrigerated trucks ready to load the weekly harvest. The gates were locked. Hanging on the gate was a handwritten wooden sign that read, "Closed permanently. No produce for sale." Word spread like wildfire through the valley. The Sydney restaurants panicked. Local farmers gossiped at the pub. Was Samir bankrupt? Had he gone mad? Was he sick? When Maya confronted him in the kitchen, demanding to know why he was walking away from hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, Samir simply held her hands and said, "Trust me, I haven't gone mad. For the first time in 20 years, I'm awake." What Samir did over the next 12 months was watched by the entire town with intense, baffling curiosity. He didn't sell the farm, but he stopped harvesting for profit. Instead, Samir picked up a shovel and began to build something in the very center of his terraced fields, a place where 3 natural springs met. He worked alone, from sunrise to midnight. He stopped using heavy tractors. He used only hand tools, timber, and native stone. Locals using binoculars from the High Ridge Road reported bizarre sights. Samir wasn't planting cash crops anymore. He was planting wild, non-commercial flowers, aromatic mountain mosses, and ancient, deep-rooted trees that bore no fruit at all. He constructed a massive circular labyrinth out of dry, stacked river stones. In the middle of the labyrinth, he built a simple timber shelter with open walls, dismantled the commercial washing plants and cold storage units. He took his entire fortune, the millions he had earned from mining, engineering, and his years of commercial farming, and put it into a perpetual trust fund. Then, on a cold spring morning, Samir unlocked his iron front gate and opened it to the public. He posted a new sign. It didn't mention prices. It didn't mention sales. It simply read, "The Sanctuary of Remembrance. Entry is free. Take what you need, leave what you carry." People didn't understand at first, but slowly, out of curiosity, they came. A retired miner from Kalgoorlie, suffering from black lung and deep anxiety, wandered into the sanctuary. He walked through Samir's stone labyrinth, sat beneath the living willow shelter, and drank the icy water from the hand-dug spring. For the first time in 30 years, the old miner wept and felt his chest unburden itself. A young migrant woman from South America, lonely and overwhelmed by the strangeness of a new country, walked through Samir's terraced fields. She smelled the damp moss, the wild herbs, and the native cedar, a scent Samir had spent a year carefully balance planting, and she sat down on a stone bench and smiled, feeling for an hour like she was home. Samir had realized what his soul was actually starving for. He didn't want to conquer the earth to prove he was safe. He didn't want to turn soil into money. He realized that his life's journey, from the terraced mountains of his youth to the deep red mines to the high-tech engineering offices, had given him a unique gift. He knew how to heal broken land, and he knew what it felt like to be a broken human. He took his farm, a place that was once just a copy of his past, and transformed it into a sanctuary for anyone who was lost, exhausted, or far from home. He didn't sell his crops anymore. Instead, he allowed visitors to harvest what they needed for their families for free. In return, he asked only one thing, that they write down a memory, a story, or a burden on a slip of paper and bury it in the soil at the base of the central willow tree. If you visit the valley today, you won't see a commercial farm. You won't see shipping trucks or ledger books. You will see a lush, living paradise where thousands of people travel every year. You will see an old engineer with silver hair and dirt beneath his fingernails sitting by a stone well, listening quietly to the stories of strangers. Samir never returned to his home country. He didn't need to, because he finally understood that home isn't a place you leave behind, nor is it a place you can buy with gold. Home is the quiet space you build when you finally stop digging for wealth and start planting peace for others. And that is the story of the man who dug through the dark, only to plant the light.